Commissioners, thanks for your time. This Royal Commission has now been running 2.5 years and it's looking at the national crisis that is defence and veteran suicide. We know there's no single cause and no single solution to suicide. Going into what is a landmark inquiry, did you have an awareness of just how incredibly complex and multi-layered the issues at the core of the Royal Commission would be?
Well, I guess I had a fair idea, having been part of the review that the National Mental Health Commission did in 2017, of both the complexity of the issue and the complexity of the landscape.
I think I did expect it to be very complex, but the granularity of it didn't really hit until after we took off.
I was in much the same situation as Nick, but having read the terms of reference, I concluded it was pretty clearly a complex landscape, but what I've learned since has illustrated how much more complex and detailed and deep the issues go.
You come from very diverse backgrounds. How has your, previous experience set you up for what has been quite a challenging 2.5 years so far?
I have run a number of inquiries in the past, sometimes internationally, often under a sort of an intense glare of the media and public attention. Hopefully we will do well here. We will bring the report in and have a real impact on the problems that we're tackling. But the key is to stay focused and to avoid distractions as you go along.
And how confident, are you that this Royal Commission can make a real difference to the health and wellbeing of our defence and veteran populations, considering that mental health issues here in Australia and around the world are in endemic proportions?
Look, I feel quite confident that we can make a difference, and the reason I say that is because we're not just looking at mental health at a time when there is a huge demand for mental health services. What we're looking at is systems and culture, and about getting acceptance of the issue across the systems, about bringing change to the systems with a focus on well-being, not just on mental health. So whilst there is a need to attend to mental health, and yes, there is issues, broad issues around mental health, as you say, nationally and internationally, our focus is much broader than that.
Do you think that you're looking, at defence and veteran suicide? Will there be benefits from this inquiry to the broader population, do you think?
Almost certainly there will be. Certainly we've learned a great deal, and we'll be saying a great deal about what ought to happen, and it has to have implications for the wider community and perhaps other emergency and uniformed services.
It's been the deeply personal and often harrowing stories of people with lived experience that have shone a bright light in dark places throughout this inquiry. How critical has their contribution been?
I'd say their experience has been enormously influential. You see it in the public arena and the hearings, and that's very important for our public audience to see what the effect of these issues has been on the individuals involved. But we've also had more exposure in private sessions to individuals, sometimes I think, who are more willing to expose what's happened to them in private than might be the case in public hearings. But either way, we're seeing very harrowing stories brought home immediately to us and showing the effect of the problems that we're looking into and hoping to at least partially solve.
I think for me, in addition to what James has just said, I think the private sessions, yes, they've shown the range of experiences and the impact it's had for participants and their loved ones oftentimes. But what we've also seen is the positives of service, what people obviously have gotten out of service that's been positive for them and that remains with them. And we've also seen, and I think this is so important, is that strength and resilience and the courage that people have. And I think oftentimes that's built on their service, on what they've gotten out of service. But that tells you that there's great foundations there to build on. And you can see from talking to people, if we can address the issues that are creating negatives and kind of mitigate or remove those, then there's so much positives there potentially. So for me, those private sessions have just been really important in kind of sending home that message, I think, to look at the strengths as well as the sad things.
Because not everyone who serves has a terrible time. In fact, the vast majority go on to have a successful career in the forces and then transition out successfully.
That's absolutely correct.
I'll just add in relation to the private sessions is that you would have to be heartless not to have really felt for some of the people we've heard from. And I think we need to commend them for their courage in coming forward, reliving some dreadful experiences to better inform us. I think all three of us have really, it's been pivotal for us to see it firsthand and to hear it firsthand and to share that experience with people who have really been traumatised and yet chose to put their hand up and come and share their stories with us. We commend them, and it's been absolutely pivotal in our thinking about as we go forward.
And the Commission has a trauma-informed practice or a trauma-informed policy at the centre of everything it does. How important is that when you're dealing with vulnerable people?
It's essential. Anyone who's been in a traumatising experience should not be further traumatised by having to deal with us or any investigative body that comes in afterwards. I think that's been a message that we've got again and again from everyone we've spoken to, that it's not easy for people to have to sit and relive something dreadful that's happened to them, but it is so valuable for us. But certainly for us, as well as having a trauma-informed approach to the stakeholders that we're dealing with, we've tried to have the same approach to staff as well and to our own welfare so that we can continue for the duration of the Royal Commission without anybody being hurt.
It also mustn't be easy sitting through those sessions as a commissioner. It must take a toll. How have you prioritised your own mental health over the last 2.5 years?
I think for me, my background in psychiatry means that I'm, I guess, accustomed to dealing with people who have challenging issues. In psychiatry, we use a process of supervision, I guess, and sharing with colleagues and peers, so that you get that support and are able to continue doing the work that you're doing. I still have my psychiatry peer groups, and I do sometimes use that. We as commissioners share with each other, and we use that. We've got some great staff around us that support us in many different ways, and that's really very valuable and important to us as well.
And obviously staff wellbeing has to come into play as well, because they're reading distressing material day in, day out as this inquiry continues.
I think it's, thinking of it from the point of view of the staff too, important to realise that they may not have had as much exposure to trauma as the three of us have in our various previous lives, either in the courtroom or in investigating serious crime in Nick's case, or as a psychiatrist in Peggy's case. But we have equipped the Royal Commission with counselling services for all staff, including ourselves, and that's a useful avenue to share the load, if you like. It's also useful to have your family behind you and some other activities to divert you when our focus isn't wholly on this work.
The AAHW has released updated suicide monitoring data which shows, sadly, that there's been no improvement in suicide rates. We know ex-serving males and females who served in the permanent forces are at significantly higher risk of suicide, as are females who only served in the reserves. And I think the latest stats are 1,677 deaths by suicide from 1997 to 2021 among serving and ex-serving ADF members who served after 1985. How have we gotten to where we are today?
I think there's been neglect of these issues on a number of levels for decades. Firstly, at the political level, where hundreds of recommendations and dozens of reports were tabled and given to ministers and prime ministers. Those same reports landed on chiefs of defence force desks, chiefs of the various services, and then there's the secretaries, successive secretaries of the Department of Veteran Affairs. There has been neglect, and I would add to that that in some ways the public and the media have also not been that engaged with these issues and have not insisted or demanded or asked for change when it was clearly called for at various points in time. Overall, I think it's just neglect that's got us to where we are.
I don't disagree with Nick in saying that, but I do think we need to recognise that society has changed somewhat. Historically, I think suicide was seen as a failing of the individual. It was seen as some character weakness, that they weren't strong enough to go on, and made a choice to end their life. Now I think society is increasingly recognising that, in fact, suicide is much more than just about an individual's choice, and that there are many factors that contribute, and a lot of them are systemic factors. So I think, to be fair, whilst I do think there's been a lot of neglect and indeed head in the sand, I think that history, the approach has changed over time, and I think we're at a point in time now where we can actually grapple with these issues more openly.
And the numbers don't tell the full story. The situation is probably a lot worse than what we actually know.
Well, it's definitely a lot worse. Even if you just look at the AIHW report, we know that it gives us the figures between 1997 and 2021 for those who've served after 1985. The reason that it's only 1997 and not 1985 is because they don't have the records to be able to give us accurate numbers between 1985 and 1997. But even of the numbers they do know, there's another 330 there that aren't in that 1677. And that's within complete records. So we're really up to 2,000 at least since 1985. And then you've got all the ones that were never actually classified as a suicide, where the intent can't be ascertained. So it's definitely many more than the actual figure.
And we mustn't forget that the year 1985 as the starting date excludes a lot of people who would have served in Vietnam. And we know anecdotally that there has been a large number of suicides amongst Vietnam veterans.
The Royal Commission's doing its own deeper dive into some of that data that might improve our understanding around risk and protective factors of service. How important is that work?
I think it's going to be fairly important for us, for this Royal Commission, to delve into and understand the stats that are available and the ones that are not available, so we can identify where the problems have been. I mean, one of the biggest problems I think the Royal Commission has come up against is the inadequacy of data keeping in terms of these issues. Hopefully one of the things this Royal Commission will achieve is to recommend better ways for data to be kept and captured and studied, analysed, trends being looked at, and then solid recommendations to come out of that analysis.
I think the other thing to add to that, though, is that the deeper dive is going to assist us in prosecuting the case with defence, that actually the problem starts when people are in service. Up until very recently, I think Defence looked at the data and saw that the rate for serving and currently serving members was lower. And so they saw the problem as commencing after people left service. We believe that the risk factors are starting whilst they're in service, and I think that deeper dive is going to allow us to illustrate that much more clearly.
Now, this is not a problem that's exclusive to Australia. You visited the Five Eyes. Looking back on those visits, is there anything that's particularly struck you that might be of benefit for Australia to be considering in tackling this issue?
There's a couple of things I would say that spring to mind. One was in the UK. I think what we saw there was a real collaborative, integrated approach. And I think it's enabled in part by their geography. They're a much smaller country, but there is a real effort made to actually integrate, for example, the ESO sectors, the charities, with the health services and other services. And I think that has great benefit. And we see, the UK figures, their suicide rate in the ex-serving is actually no higher than the general population. So I think that may well play a part in it. The other one that comes to mind was New Zealand, and they utilised their Māori culture, and particularly in thinking about about their style of leadership and that sense of family and togetherness. But also they told us about the god of war and the god of peace. So you can be a strong warrior in the Defence Forces when you need to be, but you can also have the other part of you, which is about not having to be strong, to admit your vulnerabilities and to be able to reach out and seek help. Again, that's a really important message that currently I think in our Australian Defence Force, the culture is still very much focused on that strength, being strong, not showing any weakness, not seeking help. And we have to break through that if we're actually going to grapple with this issue of suicide and suicidality.
When we were in the US as well, it was evident, to me at least, how the military is treated with respect and recognised publicly more so than we do. And you do get the impression from some people in the military that they feel a lack of recognition here, which I think we as a population could improve on, because they are, in the worst possible case, giving their lives to the country.
I'd just add to what James said is that I certainly agree that the US has a far stronger culture of acknowledgement and honouring serving and former members. But I'll just add to that, there is also seemed to be more engagement and interest from the political class in all things military and in particular veteran issues. But I mean, we have to also keep in mind that the number of people in the political sphere in the US who have a military background or have relatives in the military is probably larger than what we've got here. It certainly seemed to be a positive thing where they questioned things and asked for status reports and so on, up to and including the White House. Many people said they had to brief the White House. I don't recall too many instances where the Prime Minister of Australia called for a briefing about welfare issues in the veteran community, for instance. I'm sure it happens, but I don't think it's as often as the US. In the Canadian sphere, they seem to have a culture of making things more sort of structured, I guess. The sense I had is that they have a way to build things and then it hopefully works. And as one example is the use of advocates for veterans. They have essentially a small department that deals with that, but it's very structured. It has a clear charter, and they seem to be assessing how it's going, and they have results that they could tell us about and the percentile success rates and so on. All of that, I think, is we could learn from.
It's obviously far too early to talk about findings and recommendations. Your inquiries are still very much ongoing. However, from what you've learned to date, what do you see as the really critical cultural or systemic issues that will require urgent action to ensure improved health and wellbeing outcomes of our serving and ex-serving ADF members and their families?
I think we've certainly identified a whole range of areas where action is required. I think particularly what comes to mind is what I spoke about before. I think Defence actually accepting that the issue starts there, and for them to take it seriously, invest the time, effort and resources required. I believe that we're seeing the beginnings of that actually happening now. Still got a long way to go, but that's a really important issue. I think another one is in the ESO sector. ESOs are so important in the overall ecosystem for veterans, and they do a great job. But there is a need to actually enhance the collaboration, cooperation between them. We've started to see some early beginnings for that, and with some discussions around a peak body. I think that's an area where we want to see more happening. Data collection, as Nick referred to earlier, so important, and we're going to have some recommendations around that for sure.
And how important, this is not in the questions, but how important is the role of state and territory governments in addressing these issues as well?
I think it's really important that state and territories are part of this big picture. I think everyone thinks defence and DVA and that's the end of the story, and that's not the case at all. State and territories are actually primarily about delivering services. And for veterans and particularly their families, it is about services in the location where they live, and that is states and territories, whether it's education for children or their employment or, sometimes interactions with police, housing, corrective services, even sometimes, licensing around certain occupations, etc. It's all state-based, so it's really important that they see themselves as part of the equation.
I just wanted to add about recommendations. I think we have found so many issues in so many areas. One of the challenges that faces us and faces the Royal Commission is trying to distill and prioritise what recommendations we make. I don't think anyone wants to hand in 500 recommendations. It's a recipe for things being ignored yet again and no real success being achieved. So one of our tasks is to try and distill and filter and to some extent prioritise the things that we're going to recommend so that they are realistic and achievable.
Your interim report made it clear that families are an integral support system for ADF members, yet they too can be adversely affected by service life. Are defence families a focus of the Royal Commission, and how can the Royal Commission ensure that the needs of defence families are prioritised going forward and that families are seen as an essential part of the solution in addressing suicide and suicidality?
I think families are absolutely front and centre in our minds and in the Royal Commission's priorities. And it is one of the things that we must find a different way to recommend that ought to be dealt with. They have been neglected to a great extent, and they haven't really been factored into a lot of the thinking that's come out of the ADF and the DVA. The impact is absolutely clear. There is no doubt that the employment of the spouse or the father or the mother or the sister or the brother has an impact on families. And as one example, which is pretty crystal clear, is the regular movements of people as is required for their service within the Australian Defence Force, male and female. If you have to move and your kids are moving and changing schools every 2 or 3 years, I don't think anyone could argue that that does not have an impact on people. We hope with our recommendations that we address a lot of these problems and try and recommend a better way for families to be looked after. And the first step for that has been to listen. We've had quite a number of engagements, both in public hearings, in the steering committees or advisory committees that we've had. We've used them as a conduit to listen to all the concerns that have been raised by people who are thinking about what's best for families.
The Royal Commission's announced its final public hearing for March, 4 weeks, starting from the 4th of March. What's the significance of the hearing block, and who are we likely to hear from?
We're going to hear from a lot of service chiefs and heads of public service departments who do work in this area, some of whom we've heard from before. But this hearing block will be especially important for us to put some of our conclusions or recommendations to them and to see what response we get back. And that may well help us tailor the recommendations or the findings more precisely. There will also be lived experience witnesses, some of whom we've heard of and from in the past, but who have not yet had the chance to speak fully to their experiences. And we expect that this will be the wrap-up of the evidence in such a way that we can confidently then finalise the report in the weeks and months following that hearing.
You've said before that the Royal Commission presents a once-in-a-generation opportunity to find real, meaningful and long-lasting solutions to the cultural and systemic issues which are failing our finest. and contributing to the high rates of suicide and suicidality that we've seen. The challenges that the Royal Commission has faced are well documented. Are we seeing better cooperation now from the Commonwealth and its agencies?
We've had a series of meetings recently with government agencies and certain individuals that I think have been very, very productive and very positive. Hopefully things are on track, but there has been a certain amount of time lost, I think, in haggling over things that probably we should never have had to haggle over. But I have to say, our experience in this Royal Commission is not unique. We have looked and tried to learn from previous inquiries, and it's fairly consistent that they come up against the issues we've come up against, where the bureaucracy, if I can use that term, is perhaps not as agile, as cooperative as it should be.
Peggy mentioned before the ESO sector and their work towards a national peak body. I guess that's one good example of a sector not waiting for the outcome of the Commission to take things forward. Are there other things that you've identified or that you've seen that could be being done now while the Royal Commission is on foot, that be it government agencies or other industry sector bodies could be doing to address some of these issues?
There's probably a few examples that can be happening concurrently with the Royal Commission sitting, but probably one good example is the DVA going about trying to bring down the number of outstanding claims so that they can be dealt with, and those who are really feeling the pinch, waiting for their claims to be approved, can get on with their lives. But there are probably many other examples.
I think it's fair to say that during the life of the Royal Commission there have been ongoing developments. For example, there's been changes around family support packages. There's been recently a strategy released around domestic violence and those in the military. So there are initiatives not necessarily directly arising out of the Royal Commission, but that are touching upon areas that are important and relevant to the Royal Commission. That's just the process, I guess, of government and how it works. Things, do happen over time. But it's really important that all of these things come together, I guess, and that we bring them together in our final report and illustrate the importance of, the individual issues, whether it's families or whether it's support packages or whatever.
There's been countless previous inquiries. We've talked about 57 previous inquiries, hundreds of recommendations that for whatever have failed to make a dent on what is a national issue of significance. You've said that the risk is far too great for this Royal Commission not to succeed. With that in mind, you're currently undertaking targeted consultation on a powerful new entity to follow this Royal Commission to monitor implementation of your recommendations and watch this space forevermore. How important is the need for robust, independent oversight to ensure that mistakes from the past are not repeated?
Robust, independent oversight will be absolutely crucial. It hasn't worked without it. That's simply what it comes down to. All those dozens of inquiries and hundreds of recommendations, some of which have been carried out, they simply haven't had an impact because nobody's sat down and thought, has this worked? Are we having an impact? And if not, what else do we need to do that is different? And then reporting publicly, making the public, the government, the media aware of what's happening or not happening, so that if change is required, it's pressed and it actually occurs.
And we just don't need commitment from this government, right? It's about independent, or it's about bipartisan support or cross-party support, because if there's a change of government, we need there to be commitment, because these changes will take time.
I think bipartisan support will be crucial as well, and I would hope it exists in some way already, and will certainly be required if our recommendations are to be carried through. But for both sides of politics, this should not be about politics. It's about human beings who have not been looked after as well as they should have been, and any attempt to fix all that so that they can be properly and adequately cared for should not be argued against by anyone.
I think it also needs a persistent focus to be applied to make sure that governments of whatever persuasion are reminded time and again about what needs to be done. Because absent that sort of reminder, it's very easy to put it on the back burner, and that's something that may have happened too much before.
There are a lot of people anxiously awaiting the outcome of the Royal Commission, hoping that you can deliver a blueprint that government can use to address the national tragedy once and for all. Do you feel that weight of expectation?
I think we feel the weight of history, those dozens of inquiries that have preceded us, and many people saying to us, "You're it, you're the last hope," is something we've taken note of. I think we already knew that before anybody said it, but we certainly feel that weight of history, and we feel a moral responsibility to make sure that we are not just another inquiry, that we actually achieve what we set out to do, and that we have that long-lasting, really positive impact.
I might just add to what Nick said. I think that we have to be realistic. We haven't got a magic wand, and we're not going to be waving a magic wand and suddenly making the whole problem disappear. It is going to take a long time to actually address all of what needs to be addressed, to actually reduce the rate of suicide. But what we can put in place, and hopefully will put in place through this Royal Commission, is the foundations for that ongoing improvement and sustained effort. And if we get those foundations right, then we can look forward to continuing improvement over years to come.
I'll put this last question to each of you. What does success look like for you?
For me, success looks like a whole range of different things. It looks like Defence acknowledging that they actually are part of the problem and are also part of the solution. I think it looks like the government actually changing and accepting that they have to be more active in this space. I think it looks like the community actually getting behind the veteran sector and to some extent holding government to account for what they do and don't do. I think it looks like systems change and across not just Defence and DVA but some of the other systems as well. So it's about better data collection. So it's a whole range of different things. But ultimately we would obviously like to see the suicide rate come down. But some of those other things are the precedents to a change in the actual rate.
There's not much to add to that apart from just reiterating. I think success really is across those areas. If we can influence to have a significant change in the government's approach and the leadership of the ADF's approach, the DVA, and then media and the public, then I think hopefully we'll be on the way to achieving success. But as Peggy has said and others have said, as we all know, this isn't an overnight process. This is going to be some years in the making, but I would hope that we, the Royal Commission, will at the very least establish the basics, and then it'll change from there.
We actually asked ourselves this question pretty early on at the start of the Royal Commission, and one of the answers was a significant reduction in the suicide rate over a number of years. Now, the number of years could be significant, 10, 20 years, but I think that what we've learnt in the meantime is illustrated by the various improvements that can be made that Peggy spoke of just then, in systems within the military, within DVA, in data collection. I think also in the treatment of individuals by the system, because that's one of the real areas where problems arise, individuals being badly treated. And if that can be improved, that would be a great achievement, I think.
Thank you all. Is there anything else that you wanted to add that we haven't touched on?
Just, I think, to say that it's been a privilege to actually sit in the role as Commissioner
That's
on
true.
this Royal Commission. And we hope that we can make the real difference that everybody is looking for.
Thank you.